How many times have you walked outside and said, hey, it's a nice day out today, expecting the same conditions tomorrow? You go outside and notice there is a massive change in conditions. It's annoying, but it happens. And in this video, I want to talk about when this has happened, mostly in New York City, but we will be focusing on other areas, particularly in cases like December 21st. Like, what happened in Denver? Well, what happened was you went from 51 degrees on December 21st in the afternoon down to negative 24 degrees at the next morning on December 22nd. You had a 75-degree temperature drop, which is insane. Temperatures within a single hour dropped from 42 degrees down to a meager 5 degrees. Just hang on a second, I'm gonna do a very risky cross. Anyway, so you had those conditions, and you might have, if you weren't paying attention, walked outside on December 22nd and realized how incredibly freezing it was. So that's why you always check the weather. But this is not just unique to Denver. A drastic change in conditions occurred in New York on December 23rd as well. Granted, it was not nice when it was 58 degrees, it was pouring rain. But then you walk outside the next morning when it's clear and you notice that it's only 7 degrees outside. It was the start of a 3-day cold wave in what could be the mildest and least snowy winter on record. And there was a cold wave. So that's never fun. Drastic changes in weather don't happen in New York City quite as often because we have moderating forces. We have the Atlantic Ocean, which does some kind of a job at making our temperatures be more in check. That being said, dramatic drops in New York City weather have happened before. They've even happened, recently. Maybe not so much so this winter, but in mid-November, we had a dramatic change in temperatures. On November 11th, Nicole moved through. There was already this urban heat out, and in fact, it led to outlying suburbs being in the low 50s, whereas the city center was in the upper 50s. But everyone warmed to the upper 60s, and it was quite humid too, because Hurricane Nicole was moving to the west of our area, which led to very warm conditions. November 12th would be very warm. Low temperatures would be about 60 degrees, which is record-breaking for the time of the year. And we would see record highs throughout a lot of places as temperatures just went into the 70s. It was 71 degrees here. The city got the short end of the stick and only hit 69, considering that even Burlington broke their record and hit 71 degrees. It was very nice outside. A lot of places got up to 74 degrees. Where I lived, it was 71 degrees, and I took advantage of these conditions to walk from the Plainview-Hicksville border all the way up to pretty much into Brookville, I think. It was a pretty big walk. But it was also the warmest it would ever get in 2022 from that point going forward. It wasn't so dramatic, though, as by November 13th, even in the afternoon, temperatures were still clinging on in the mid-50s, but by November 14th, temperatures were already down to the upper 30s in the morning and would not make it past 45 degrees. That was a dramatic change in conditions, and if you weren't paying attention, you notice how it went from being warm to moderate to all of a sudden it was very cold outside. Then November 7th to 9th, another dramatic change in conditions. Even on the 7th to the 8th, after peaking at 77 degrees in the city and up to 81 degrees throughout the metro area, that's right, a lot of places hit the 80s, all of a sudden the cold front drops temperatures down to the mid-50s by midnight. So any chance of having a record warm low temperature was broken when this happened, and continued to plunge down to the mid-40s on November 8th. For New York City, it was their first time going below 50 degrees for the month of November. Afternoon highs did not get past the mid-50s, and temperatures were already in frost territory by November 9th. So from 36 hours, it went from being feeling like early September to feeling more like early December. That's dramatic. And these dramatic changes in conditions usually don't occur as you get towards the summer, and usually as they do, they get less and less noteworthy because, simply put, people don't notice these kinds of things quite as much. When it's over a long period of time, you're never going to notice a change, even if it's a dramatic change over the course of a few days, because it's over a few days. It's mainly the one-night changes that you have to keep your eyes out for. I will say a good example in some parts of the metro area was September 1st to 2nd. Now, anyone with an urban heat island effect would not really feel this the same way because lows only got down to 62 degrees in New York City. And the high the previous day was only 86. That's a somewhat common swing. But in my suburb, not specifically my suburb, but, at the Farmingdale weather station, they recorded a high temperature of 88 degrees on September 1st. And temperatures then plunged down to 59 degrees the next morning on September 2nd. And I mean, even when dark sky was around, they were still reporting a high of 87 degrees for my specific location, followed by a low of then 60. That's quite a lot. Here's why it didn't really get attention. First of all, it was only a very select few locations that had this happen, and I happened to be in the lucky batch that got to see temperatures drop by nearly 30 degrees. That was not the case in a lot of places. Second of all, the morning low the day before, at least where I live, was 65 degrees. So, therefore, it was already cold or chilly, warming back up to being quite warm, and then plunging back down. The high that day would be 78 degrees. It would actually be 79 in the city as well. So while the afternoon felt quite a bit cooler and more comfortable, it's still, it was still a bit warm. Finally, and most importantly, the humidity on September 1st was very low. That allowed it to get down to the 50s in the first place, but because the humidity was very low, it actually felt more like the mid-80s rather than the upper 80s that it really was. Because low humidity makes it feel cooler than it really is. And the humidity began to build back on September 2nd, although it really wasn't until September 4th where the humidity was back in full swing. Alright, so if you want more extreme changes in weather, we do have to go back quite a bit because you don't really see those all that often anymore. In the summer, a lot of times what we see are dramatic warm-ups. Like how on June 12th it was quite clammy and cold and only hit the low 70s, followed by mid-80s with heat indexes in the upper 80s even on June 13th. That's because the sky is cleared out. Once that happens, that June sun just bakes down on you. The low temperature on June 12th was above average. It was the high temperature that really constrained the day. Another case of extreme temperature changes over a short period of time, could even be the deterioration of conditions in late May. And by deterioration of conditions, I mean all of a sudden it got very hot. This is a lot rarer than an extreme temperature plunge. It just is. Because usually warm air takes longer to settle in than cold air. That being said, it was a pleasant 69 degrees in the afternoon of May 20th, and that was before being rocked by a thunderstorm. After the thunderstorm, temperatures got no lower than 62, and the next day skyrocketed up to 90 degrees, nearly breaking records. So that must have been a a very abrupt change in conditions from a mild afternoon that is typical of May into all of a sudden summer. Very few people were complaining, however, because this was our first warm weather of the year, and in general, our first warm weather since late August. Central Park did not hit the 90s since August 27th, 2021, before this point. So people weren't complaining because it came at a seasonable time, and as a matter of fact, it was even the first 80-degree temperature of the year. That made it the latest first 80-degree temperature since 1988. All right, in any case, dramatic changes in temperature. We are starting to get back into that season, but we didn't really have that much of that throughout 2021. We didn't really have too much of it. On both ends of the 82-degree temperature, yes, it was in the low 50s, but that's just because of how the temperature skyrocketed up, and coupled with strong winds and low humidity, you never got that feel that it was actually June-like temperatures outside. It never really felt more than May-like temperatures if you were to go outside, despite being 82 degrees in late March. And because of how the temperatures in 2021 were rather constrained, it really just began to take away from that feel.